Elara could not pinpoint the exact moment the world began to tilt. Perhaps it was after the second glass of ceremonial wine, or when the moon reached its apex, and the grand hall seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. She blinked slowly, trying to anchor herself to something solid. The marble columns, the golden candelabras, the faces of laughing nobles. But everything had gone soft at the edges, warm and impossibly distant. "Lady Elara, you've barely touched your wine." The voice materialized beside her like smoke. Elara turned her head, too slowly, as though moving through honey, and found her half-sister Moira watching her with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I think I've had enough," Elara murmured. Her tongue felt thick, clumsy in her mouth. "Nonsense. It's the moon convocation." Moira lifted the crystal decanter, filling Elara's glass to the brim. "The lunar herbs are meant to open fate's doors. You wouldn't want to miss your destiny, would you?" Elara accepted the glass without protest, though some distant part of her mind whispered warnings she couldn't quite hear. Her body felt feverish despite the cool autumn air filtering through the high windows. Perhaps more wine would settle her nerves, or perhaps it would make everything worse. She no longer knew which. The annual moon convocation had never been a modest affair. It was the night when the Alpha Council gathered beneath the full moon to forge alliances, assess bloodlines, and chart the course of kingdoms. The ritual wine, consecrated with lunar herbs, said to loosen inhibition and reveal hidden truths, flowed as freely as conversation. No one questioned the tradition. No one dared. But something was wrong. Elara pressed a hand to her temple, feeling perspiration bead along her hairline. The music, strings and drums that had seemed beautiful an hour ago, now echoed inside her skull, distorted and too loud. The laughter of nobles around her seemed to come from underwater, muffled yet somehow piercing. "I need air," she said to no one in particular. She rose unsteadily, gripping the edge of the table to keep the floor from swaying beneath her feet. Moira watched with that same peculiar smile, but said nothing. Elara didn't care. She just needed to escape the suffocating heat, the crushing noise, the feeling that her body no longer belonged to her. Each step toward the terrace doors required conscious effort. Each breath came harder than the last. She clutched the silk skirt of her gown, trying desperately not to stumble, not to draw the attention of eyes that already lingered too long on House Viral's forgotten daughter. That was when she collided with someone. The impact sent them both staggering. Strong hands caught her arms just as her fingers clutched at rough fabric and solid muscle. They stood frozen, locked together in a desperate attempt not to fall. "Careful." His voice emerged low and rough, as though dragged through gravel. Elara lifted her gaze and forgot how to breathe. The man before her was imposing, powerfully built with shoulders that seemed to block out the candlelight behind him. His face was all sharp angles and aristocratic lines, marked by a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and eyes so intensely dark they appeared black in the flickering light. But it wasn't merely his appearance that struck her breathless. It was the way he looked at her, as though she had shaken something loose inside him that he couldn't name. He blinked slowly, clearly fighting to focus. "Are you all right?" His own voice betrayed that he wasn't. Elara tried to answer, but the words tangled on her tongue. No, I don't think so." He dragged a hand down his face, a gesture of frustration and confusion. "This wine. There's something in this wine." "You drank it too?" Elara tightened her grip on his arm to keep the world from spinning out from under her. "Too much." A sound escaped him, almost a laugh, but without any humor. "Far more than I should have." They stood there in the corridor, each leaning into the other, two people drowning in the same poisoned current. His hands remained steady on her arms, anchoring her when everything else had become unmoored. Elara could feel the heat radiating from him, could smell something wild and earthy beneath the wine, pine and smoke and something else entirely. Her heart hammered against her ribs in a rhythm that had nothing to do with fear. "I don't—" She swallowed hard. "I don't even know your name." His dark eyes met hers, and for a moment clarity flickered in their depths, recognition, confusion, something that looked dangerously like inevitability. "Does it matter?" he whispered. And before she could answer, before she could think, before she could remember all the reasons why this was wrong, the world went dark at its edges, pulling her under like a tide. Before we continue, please hit the subscribe and like button and tell me which city you're tuning in from. I love to know where this story found you. Now back to the story. Elara woke to cold grey light and crushing silence. She lay alone in an unfamiliar chamber, still wearing her gown from the night before, wrinkled, wine-stained, hanging loose around her shoulders. Her head throbbed with each heartbeat. Her mouth tasted of ashes and regret. Slowly, she sat up, fragments of memory cutting through the fog. The hall, the wine, Moira's smile, the stranger's hands steadying her, his voice in the darkness. His. Elara pressed both hands to her face as horror crashed over her in waves. What had she done? She looked around the empty room, a guest chamber judging by its sparse furnishings and lack of personal effects. Dawn light filtered through sheer curtains, illuminating nothing. No note, no explanation, no trace of the man whose name she couldn't remember, and whose face had already begun to blur in her mind. Only one truth remained sharp and undeniable. She had given herself to a stranger, and he had vanished like smoke before sunrise. Elara rose on shaking legs, shame burning through her chest like fever. She couldn't stay here, couldn't let anyone see her like this, couldn't let anyone know what had happened beneath the poisoned light of the convocation moon. She smoothed her ruined gown, lifted her chin, and walked back into a world that would soon devour her whole. 8 weeks after the moon convocation, Elara knelt on the cold stone floor of her private chamber and emptied her stomach into a porcelain basin for the 3rd morning in a row. When the retching finally subsided, she sat back on her heels, trembling. The healer's words from the previous afternoon still echoed in her mind, clinical and devastating. "You are with child, my lady. Perhaps 2 months along. No." Elara pressed both hands against her still flat abdomen, willing it to be a mistake, a sickness, anything else. But her body had already been whispering the truth for weeks, the missed bleeding, the exhaustion that dragged at her bones, the way certain smells now turned her stomach. She squeezed her eyes shut and forced herself to remember that night, to find something, anything, that would give her a name to speak when her family demanded answers. But the memories remained fragmented, dissolving like mist whenever she tried to grasp them. Dark eyes, strong hands, a voice that had made her feel safe even as the world crumbled, and then nothing. Only the devastating emptiness of waking alone. "Please," she whispered to the universe, to the moon, to whatever cruel fate had authored this nightmare. "Please let me remember." The universe did not answer. Her father summoned her that evening. Lord Cedric of House Virel sat behind his carved oak desk, his face carved from the same unforgiving stone as the castle walls. Her stepmother stood beside him, rigid and silent. Moira lingered near the window, the picture of sisterly concern that fooled no one who truly looked. "The healer has informed us of your condition," Lord Cedric said, the word dripping with distaste. Elara stood before them, with her hands folded, her spine straight, despite the shame burning through her chest. Yes, Father. Who is responsible? I don't know. The silence that followed was more violent than any blow. You don't know? Her stepmother's voice could have frozen fire. You spread your legs for a man whose name you cannot even provide. It was the convocation night. The wine. Do not blame sacred tradition for your weakness. Lord Cedric cut her off. Do you understand what you have done? The disgrace you have brought upon this house? Elara said nothing. What defense could she possibly offer? We will keep this quiet as long as possible, her father continued. You will remain in the East Wing. No public appearances, no visitors. When your condition becomes visible, we will claim illness and keep you confined. And the child? Elara's voice emerged, smaller than she intended. Will be dealt with when the time comes. Lord Cedric waved his hand dismissively. For now, you will disappear. As Elara turned to leave, Moira's voice followed her, sweet as poisoned honey. Such a terrible accident. Dear sister, if only you had shown more restraint. Elara did not respond, but she caught the gleam of satisfaction in Moira's eyes, and understanding clicked into place with sickening clarity. The wine, the constant refilling of her glass, Moira's smile. You did this to me. But proving it was impossible, and even if she could, who would believe House Virel's forgettable daughter over her father's favoured child? The weeks that followed were a slow burial. Elara was moved to rooms in the oldest part of the estate, far from the main halls where guests might glimpse her. Her meals arrived on trays. Her gowns were adjusted to hide the growing curve of her belly. She was permitted to walk the gardens only at dawn when the household still slept. She became a ghost in her own home. Meanwhile, whispers began to spread like illness through the noble houses. Lord Cedric's daughter, disgraced, no father to claim the child. The rumors were carefully vague, planted with surgical precision to test the waters of scandal without drowning House Virel outright. Elara heard the servants gossiping when they thought she couldn't hear. She saw the pity and contempt in their eyes. Even her lady's maid now handled her as though shame were contagious. At night, alone in her exile, Elara pressed her hands to her growing belly and whispered apologies to the life forming inside her. This child had done nothing wrong. This child deserved a name, protection, a future. She could offer none of it. 5 months into her pregnancy, Lord Cedric summoned her again. I have made arrangements, he said without preamble. Lord Garrett of House Thorn has agreed to consider marriage. He is widowed, aging, and desperate for an heir. He will overlook your situation in exchange for a substantial dowry. Elara's blood ran cold. Lord Garrett was 60 if he was a day, known for his cruel treatment of servants and his belief that wives existed solely to produce sons. You will marry within the month, her father continued. You will give him your child to raise as his own, and you will be grateful that anyone would have you at all. Elara opened her mouth to protest, to beg, to rage against the injustice. But what choice did she have? Who else would claim her now? Yes, father, she whispered. Good. There is a royal feast in 3 days' time. You will attend. Lord Garrett will be there to finalize the arrangement. Lord Cedric's expression hardened. Make yourself presentable. Do not embarrass this family more than you already have. Elara nodded and turned to leave, feeling the last shreds of hope die inside her chest. She had almost reached the door when her father's voice stopped her one final time. Oh, and Elara, the Alpha King himself will be in attendance. Try not to draw his attention. We cannot afford any more scandals." The door closed behind her with the finality of a tomb sealing shut. In 3 days, she would sit in a hall full of nobles who despised her, beside a man who would own her, carrying a child whose father she could not name. In 3 days, her life as she knew it would end. The moon, it seemed, had not finished destroying her yet. The chandeliers burned low as the royal feast stretched into its 3rd hour, but the woman sitting alone at the edge of the hall felt none of its warmth. Elara kept her hands folded over her stomach, fingers trembling slightly beneath the soft linen of her pale gown. The fabric had been carefully selected, flowing, modest, designed to conceal, but it could no longer hide the truth. The curve of her belly was unmistakable now, too round, too heavy with consequence to be dismissed as imagination or cruel rumor. Around her, nobles laughed. Goblets clinked against silver. Musicians played melodies that had once made her heart soar, but now felt like mockery. Candles flickered against gold-veined marble and polished mahogany, casting dancing shadows that seemed to whisper her shame. And still, no one sat beside her. The chair to her right remained conspicuously empty, despite the crowded hall. The chair to her left had been quietly removed entirely after Lady Ashford made a show of requesting a different table. Even the servants avoided her section, delivering wine and plates with hurried efficiency before retreating as though disgrace were a plague. That's her, the disgraced one, with no mate, no name for the child. The whispers followed her like ghosts, never quite loud enough to confront, but impossible to escape. Elara kept her eyes lowered, willing herself to disappear, to become as invisible as she had always been before the convocation night had destroyed her. Across the hall, Lord Garrett watched her with the cold appraisal of a man inspecting livestock. He had barely spoken to her since their introduction earlier that evening, but his meaning had been clear. She was a problem to be solved, a vessel to be used. Nothing more. Elara's hand moved unconsciously to her belly, a gesture of protection she couldn't suppress. Whatever happened to her, whatever fate her father had sold her into, this child would be innocent. This child deserved better than to be born into shame and traded like currency. But innocence, it seemed, was a luxury neither of them could afford. The hall erupted in a sudden swell of music, the herald's fanfare announcing a new arrival. Conversations faltered. Nobles turned toward the grand entrance. Even Lord Garrett straightened in his seat. Elara glanced up despite herself, and the air changed. Alpha King Rovan stood in the doorway. He was taller than she remembered, impossibly tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in dark armor etched with ancient sigils that caught the candlelight like captured stars. A crimson cloak fell from his shoulders, the color of blood and conquest. His presence alone seemed to bend the room towards silence, commanding attention without demanding it. Rovan, the Unbroken. Rovan, who had refused every alliance, every throne-born daughter placed before him, every council's attempt to bind him through marriage. Rovan, whose face Elara recognized with sickening, impossible clarity. No. Her heart stopped. Her breath caught. Her entire body went cold despite the warmth of the crowded hall. It couldn't be. The memory was too fragmented, too buried beneath wine and shame. But something in the line of his jaw, the way he moved with predatory grace, the dark intensity of his eyes as they swept the room. Does it matter? His voice from that night echoed in her memory. And Elara gripped the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. It was him, the stranger from the convocation, the father of her child, the Alpha King. Rovan moved through the hall with the confidence of a man who had never questioned his place in the world. Nobles bowed. Councilmen stepped aside. Even the music seemed to soften in deference to his presence. But he wasn't looking at them. His gaze swept across the crowd with calculated efficiency until it landed on her. Elara's breath died in her lungs. She couldn't look away, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but stare as recognition flickered across his features, followed by something far more dangerous, confusion, certainty, and something that looked almost like pain. He knew. Somehow, impossibly, he knew. The whispers around her intensified, as nobles noticed the direction of the Alpha King's attention. Elara felt their eyes on her like brands, felt the weight of their judgment and curiosity pressing down until she thought she might shatter from it. "Look away," she begged silently. "Please, just look away." But Rovan didn't look away. Instead, he moved. Conversations died in his wake. Every eye in the hall tracked his path as he crossed the marble floor with predatory purpose, ignoring councilmen who tried to intercept him, dismissing nobles who attempted to curry favor. He was walking toward her. No, no, no. Elara's mind raced with panic. If he spoke to her, if he acknowledged her publicly, the scandal would explode beyond containment. Her father would be ruined. Lord Garrett would withdraw his offer. She would be cast out with nothing. No protection, no future. Rovan stopped before her table. Up close, he was even more overwhelming than memory had painted him. The armor emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, the strength in his frame. His dark eyes held hers with an intensity that made the rest of the hall fade into insignificance. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, terrible and profound. Then Rovan leaned down, close enough that his breath warmed her temple, close enough that only she could hear the words that would change everything. "Pretend the baby is mine." Elara's world tilted on its axis. Around them, the feast continued. Nobles watching, musicians playing, servants moving through the crowd with practiced efficiency. But in the space between them, time had stopped. His hand extended toward her. Steady and sure despite the chaos his words had unleashed in her chest. And Elara, who had spent months drowning in shame and silence, stared at the lifeline he offered and couldn't breathe. The Alpha King was offering her salvation, or something far more dangerous. Elara stared at Rovan's outstretched hand as though it were a serpent poised to strike. Your Majesty," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the music. "You don't understand." "I understand enough." His tone was calm, measured, but his eyes held something fierce. "If you stay here, they will tear you apart before dawn. You know this." She did know. Every whisper, every empty chair, every contemptuous glance had made it abundantly clear. But accepting help from the Alpha King, from him, the father who didn't remember her, felt like stepping off a cliff into darkness. "The council has been demanding I take a queen for 3 years," Rovan continued, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "They've paraded every eligible daughter from every noble house before me. They've threatened sanctions, political maneuvers, everything short of forcing my hand." Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. "What does that have to do with me?" "They demand an heir." His fingers brushed her wrist, steady, warm, impossibly gentle. "You need protection." The simple truth of it struck her like a physical blow. She looked down at her rounded belly, at the child growing inside her that this entire hall had condemned before it even drew breath. "If you claim the child," she said shakily, "they'll force the engagement. You'll be bound to me, to this." She gestured helplessly at herself, at her disgrace, at everything she had become. "Yes. And when the truth comes out, when someone discovers, it won't." The certainty in his voice was absolute. "Because no one will dare challenge me." Elara searched his face for mockery, for the cruel amusement of a man toying with someone beneath him. She found none. Only urgency. Only something that looked dangerously like determination. "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why would you do this?" For a moment, something flickered in his dark eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or guilt, or something far more complicated. But it vanished before she could name it. "Because I can," he said simply. "And because you deserve better than this." He gestured toward the hall, toward the nobles who had made her an outcast, toward Lord Garrett, who watched with cold calculation, toward the father who had sold her to the highest bidder. Elara's throat tightened. No one had defended her in months. No one had suggested she deserved anything but shame. "I'm frightened," she admitted, the words barely a breath. "I know." Rovan's hand remained extended between them, steady as stone. "But you're stronger than they think. Stronger than you think." The music swelled. The moment stretched. And Elara, who had spent 5 months learning to be invisible, made a choice that would make her the most visible woman in the kingdom. She placed her hand in his. Rovan's fingers closed around hers with gentle firmness. Then, before she could change her mind, before terror could root her to the chair, he drew her to her feet. "Stay close to me," he murmured, "and trust that I know what I'm doing." Elara wanted to laugh at the impossibility of that. Trust the man who had vanished the morning after destroying her life? Trust the Alpha King who held her fate in his hands? But she had no other choice. Rovan led her through the hall, his hand a steady presence at the small of her back. Nobles parted before them like the sea before a storm. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the musicians faltered, notes trailing into silence. They stopped in the center of the hall, directly beneath the grand chandelier where every eye could see them clearly. Elara's knees threatened to buckle. The weight of hundreds of stairs pressed down on her like stones. She could see her father rising from his seat, face pale with confusion. Could see Moira's expression twist with shock. Could see Lord Garrett frozen mid-reach for his wine. Rovan's hand tightened fractionally at her back. A silent reminder that she wasn't alone. Then he spoke, his voice carrying through the hall with the authority of a man born to command. "I would have your attention." The last whispers died. The silence that fell was absolute. "There have been rumors," Rovan continued, his tone even but edged with warning, "regarding Lady Elara of House Virel. I am here to end them." Elara's heart stopped. This was it. The moment her life changed forever. For better or worse, she couldn't yet say. "The child she carries," Rovan declared, his voice ringing through the hall like a blade drawn from its sheath, "is mine." The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. Gasps rippled through the crowd, a goblet shattered against marble. Someone's chair scraped back so violently it toppled. The shock detonated through the gathered nobles like wildfire through dry grass. Elara felt the world tilt beneath her feet, but Rovan's presence kept her anchored. Lady Elara of House Virel will be my queen, he continued, as though he hadn't just shattered every expectation in the kingdom. The child will be recognized as my legitimate heir, and anyone who questions this— His gaze swept the room, dark and merciless— will answer to me personally. The threat hung in the air like drawn steel. Elara couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stand beside the Alpha King as her entire world rebuilt itself in the space of a heartbeat. Her father had gone deathly pale, his carefully constructed marriage arrangement crumbling to ash. Lord Garrett stared with his mouth slightly open, disbelief etched into every line of his aged face. The council members exchanged rapid glances, some horrified, some calculating, all stunned. And Moira looked as though she had swallowed poison. "Your Majesty," one of the councilmen finally managed, his voice strained. "Surely this requires discussion, verification. The council must—" "The council," Rovan interrupted, his tone allowing no argument, "will accept my decision, or they will find themselves seeking new positions." No one dared speak after that. Rovan turned to Elara, and for just a moment the hardness in his expression softened. "Come, you'll stay in the royal wing tonight, under my protection." He offered his arm. Elara took it, her hand trembling against the solid warmth of him. Together they walked through the hall. This time, nobles bowed as they passed. This time, the whispers carried awe instead of contempt. This time, Elara was not alone. But as the great doors closed behind them, shutting out the chaos they'd left in their wake, one truth crystallized in her mind with terrifying clarity. She had escaped one trap only to walk willingly into another. The Alpha King had claimed her, protected her, elevated her from disgrace to the highest position in the realm. But she had also seen the way the council looked at her, with calculation, suspicion, and thinly veiled hostility. She had just become the most powerful woman in the kingdom, and the most endangered. The royal chambers were nothing like the cold, sparse rooms of her exile. Elara stood in the center of a suite larger than her family's entire east wing, surrounded by velvet curtains, carved mahogany furniture, and windows that overlooked the moonlit gardens. A fire crackled in the hearth. Servants had already unpacked what few belongings she'd brought, hanging her modest gowns beside spaces clearly meant for a queen's wardrobe. It felt like a beautiful cage. Behind her, the door closed with a decisive click. She turned to find Rovan standing there, having dismissed the servants with a single gesture. Without the armor, dressed in simple dark clothing, he seemed somehow more imposing, as though the trappings of kingship had been hiding the man beneath. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Elara nodded, her hands instinctively moving to her belly. "I'm listening." Rovan crossed to the window, putting distance between them as though proximity made honesty more difficult. For a long moment, he simply stared out at the darkness. His profile etched in firelight. "This arrangement," he began, his voice carefully measured, "is temporary." The word hit her like cold water. Temporary. "I'm searching for someone, a woman from the moon convocation months ago." He didn't turn to look at her. "When I find her, this ends. You'll be released from the engagement with enough wealth and protection to live independently. Your child will be acknowledged as noble-born. You'll be free." Elara's throat tightened. "And if you don't find her?" "I will." The certainty in his voice was absolute. "But until then, you need protection. The council needs to believe I've finally chosen a queen. It serves us both." "Us both." as though they were partners in this deception, rather than strangers bound by necessity and a night neither could fully remember. So Elara struggled to find the words. A placeholder. You're a solution, Rovan corrected, finally turning to face her. To both our problems. I need the council satisfied. You need to survive with your dignity intact. This accomplishes that. The clinical nature of it stung more than Elara wanted to admit. But what had she expected? Love? Recognition? The fairy tale she'd never been promised? And the child? She asked softly. Will be protected as mine. No one will question it. No one will dare harm them. His expression hardened. You have my word on that. Elara studied his face, searching for deception and finding only resolve. Whatever his reasons, whatever woman he was searching for, his protection was real, and for her child, that had to be enough. Then I agree, she said. For as long as it lasts. Something flickered in Rovan's eyes. Relief, perhaps, or something more complicated, but it vanished before she could name it. Good. Tomorrow, the real work begins. The real work, as it turned out, was learning to be someone she wasn't. The court descended on her like vultures disguised as advisors. There were etiquette lessons, political briefings, fittings for gowns that cost more than her family's annual income. Everyone wanted something. Her favor, her influence, her ear to whisper poison into. Elara attended council meetings where she understood only half of what was discussed. She sat through formal dinners where every word was a test she hadn't studied for. She smiled until her face ached and curtsied until her swollen ankles screamed in protest. And through it all, Rovan defended her with lethal calm. When Lady Meredith suggested Elara was unsuited for queenship, Rovan's response was ice wrapped in silk. When a council member questioned the child's legitimacy, Rovan's stare alone silenced the room. He positioned himself as a wall between Elara and every threat, every insult, every scheme. But he never touched her unless necessary, never stayed in her chambers longer than propriety demanded, never let the mask slip enough to show whatever lay beneath. At night, guards stood outside her door, 4 of them, rotating in shifts. Not inside, where a husband might be. Outside, where protection ended and distance began. The message was clear. She was valuable, but not his. 3 weeks into their arrangement, Elara stood on her private balcony, watching dawn break over the kingdom that would never truly be hers. Her hand rested on her belly, feeling the child move, stronger now, more insistent. You deserve better than this, she whispered. Better than a mother playing queen. Better than a father who's pretending you exist. Is that what you think I'm doing? Elara spun, her heart leaping. Rovan stood in the doorway, still dressed from the previous night's council session. Exhaustion shadowed his eyes, but his gaze was sharp. I didn't hear you, she stammered. You shouldn't be out here alone. It's not safe. He moved onto the balcony, and suddenly the spacious terrace felt impossibly small. Your guards are right inside, Elara said, trying to keep her voice steady. I'm perfectly safe. From assassins, perhaps. Rovan's jaw tightened. But there are other dangers. They stood in silence. The morning breeze carrying the scent of jasmine, and something wild she couldn't name. Elara was acutely aware of how close he stood, how the firelight from her chambers caught in his dark hair, how his presence made her feel both protected and dangerously exposed. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for defending me yesterday, in the council meeting. You don't need to thank me for doing what's necessary. Is that all it is?" The question escaped before wisdom could stop it. Necessity. Rovan's eyes met hers, and for a heartbeat she saw something raw beneath the careful control, longing perhaps, or regret, or something that looked dangerously like want. But then he stepped back, and the moment shattered like glass. "Get some rest, Elara. You have a fitting this afternoon." He left without another word, and Elara stood alone on the balcony as dawn painted the sky in shades of gold and regret. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with fear. This was temporary, she reminded herself. A strategic arrangement. A lie built to survive. But her heart, treacherous and foolish, was beginning to believe otherwise. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. The weeks blurred together like watercolors bleeding across canvas. Elara learned the rhythm of life beside a king. Breakfast at dawn in the solar where morning light painted everything gold, council meetings where she sat silent but observant, dinners where every conversation was a carefully choreographed dance of politics and power. And through it all, Rovan was there. Not as a husband, not quite as a friend, but as something she had no name for. He sat beside her at every meal, their conversations growing easier with each passing day. He asked about her childhood, her favorite books, whether she preferred the gardens at dawn or dusk. Small things, meaningless things, things that somehow felt desperately important in the spaces between words. And when nobles dared to overstep, Rovan's response was surgical in its precision. "Lady Elara seems overwhelmed by her duties," Councilman Theron remarked during one particularly tense meeting, his tone dripping false concern. "Perhaps someone with more experience would be better suited." "Are you suggesting," Rovan interrupted, his voice soft as a blade sliding from its sheath, "that I made a poor choice in my future queen?" The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "I would never presume, Your Majesty." "Good. Then we won't hear such concerns again." Theron had gone pale. No one else dared speak. Later, Elara found Rovan alone in his study, staring at documents he wasn't reading. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly from the doorway. He glanced up, something weary in his expression. "Yes, I did. They're not wrong, though. I don't know what I'm doing. Neither did I when I took the crown at 19. Rovan set down the papers, his gaze steady on hers. "You're learning. That's enough." Elara stepped into the room, drawn by something she couldn't name. In the candlelight, without the armor of his crown and title, Rovan looked almost vulnerable, almost human. "Do you ever get tired of it?" she asked. "The politics, the constant performance. Every day." The admission came quiet, honest. "But the crown doesn't care about exhaustion. What about the man beneath it?" Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, that she had seen past the king to the person buried beneath duty and isolation. "The man beneath it," Rovan said slowly. "Forgot he existed a long time ago." The loneliness in those words struck Elara like a physical blow. She understood it intimately. The feeling of being visible, yet unseen. Surrounded, yet utterly alone. "I see him," she whispered. Rovan's eyes held hers, and for a heartbeat, the air between them became charged with something dangerous and undeniable. Then he looked away. "You should rest. The baby is fine." Elara's hand moved to her rounded belly, feeling the strong kicks that had become constant. He's active tonight. He? Rovan's lips quirked slightly. You think it's a boy? I know it is. She smiled despite herself. He has your stubbornness. The words hung between them, too intimate, too revealing. Elara's cheeks heated. I didn't mean... I know what you meant. But his hand moved as though of its own accord, hovering near her belly before catching himself. He pulled back sharply, distance slamming between them like a door. Good night, Elara. He left before she could respond, and Elara stood alone in his study, feeling the absence like cold wind. The shift came in small moments. Rovan's hand at her back as they descended stairs, steady and protective. The way he ensured her favorite tea appeared at breakfast without her asking. How his eyes tracked her across crowded rooms, as though ensuring her safety was instinct rather than obligation. And the way she caught herself watching him, the elegant efficiency of his movements, the rare moments when his stern expression softened into something almost like contentment, the sound of his laugh when something genuinely amused him. She was falling, slowly, inevitably, disastrously. The realization struck during a formal reception when Lady Cassia approached Rovan with predatory grace. She was beautiful in the way of thoroughbred horses, all elegant lines and calculated movement. Your Majesty, Cassia purred, her hand lingering on his arm. I was hoping we might discuss the trade agreements, perhaps privately? Something vicious and unfamiliar twisted in Elara's chest. Rovan's expression remained neutral. Lady Elara is my partner in all political matters. Anything you wish to discuss can be said in her presence. Cassia's smile tightened. Of course, though I imagine some topics require a more experienced perspective. Then I suggest you find someone more qualified to educate you, Rovan said, his tone dismissive. We're done here. He guided Elara away, his hand warm against her back, and she hated how much she wanted to lean into that touch, how much she wanted it to mean something it couldn't. Later that night she overheard servants gossiping outside her chambers. Poor thing, she actually believes he'll keep her. Everyone knows she's temporary. Once he finds that woman from the convocation, she'll be set aside, just another forgotten face. Elara pressed her hand to her mouth, silencing the sound that threatened to escape. They were right. She was temporary. A strategic solution to political pressure, nothing more. So why did it hurt like betrayal? She found Rovan in the training yard 2 nights later, working through sword forms with violent precision. Sweat gleamed on his skin. His movements were brutal poetry. Can't sleep? She called from the edge of the yard. He spun, surprise flickering across his features before control reasserted itself. You shouldn't be out here. It's late. So is your training. Elara moved closer, drawn by something reckless and desperate. What are you fighting? Everything. The word came rough, honest. Nothing. Rovan. You should go inside, Elara. But he didn't move away when she approached. Didn't stop her when her hand rose toward his face, trembling in the space between them. Tell me to leave, she whispered. Tell me this is just an arrangement, or tell me I'm imagining. I can't. The words tore from him like confession. God's help me, I can't. His hand covered hers where it rested against his jaw, and Elara's breath caught. Then he pulled away sharply, stepping back as though burned. This can't happen, you know that. Because you're searching for someone else. Because you deserve better than being second choice. The words should have stung. Instead, they revealed too much. That he had thought about it. That he had considered what this could become. That he wanted and was denying himself. Before Alara could respond, a guard appeared at the yard's entrance, his face pale with urgency. "Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but there's been an incident." Rovan's entire demeanor shifted into battle readiness. "What kind of incident?" "The royal wine stores, Your Majesty. Someone has tampered with the ceremonial bottles." The guard swallowed hard. "The ones prepared for tomorrow's council feast. Preliminary testing suggests moonherb poisoning." The world tilted beneath Alara's feet. Moonherb, the same poison that had destroyed her life. And someone had just tried to do it again. Despite the guard's warning, despite every precaution, Rovan collapsed 3 hours into the council feast. Alara saw it happen, the way his hand tightened on his goblet, the sudden pallor that washed over his features, the loss of focus in his dark eyes. He had been mid-sentence, discussing trade routes with a visiting dignitary, when his words simply stopped. The goblet slipped from his fingers, shattering against marble. "Rovan!" Alara was on her feet before conscious thought, her chair scraping back violently. She reached him as his knees buckled, her arms absurdly inadequate against his size, trying to catch him before he fell. Guards swarmed instantly, councilmen shouted, chaos erupted like a kicked hornet's nest, but Alara only saw him, eyes unfocused, skin burning beneath her touch, breathing harsh and irregular. "Moonherb," she said, her voice cutting through the panic with desperate clarity. "It's moonherb poisoning. Get him to his chambers, now!" They moved as one body, half carrying the Alpha King through corridors that had never seemed so endless. Alara stayed beside him, her hand gripping his as though she could anchor him to consciousness through sheer will. His chambers became a war room. Healers descended with tonics and cold compresses. Guards sealed every entrance. The council demanded answers that no one could provide. And through it all, Rovan burned. "Everyone out," Alara commanded when the healers finished their initial treatment. "Leave us." "My lady, protocol dictates." "I said out." Her voice carried an authority she hadn't known she possessed. "I've survived this poison myself. I know what he needs." They hesitated, but something in her expression, or perhaps the desperation, convinced them. The room emptied until only Alara remained, kneeling beside Rovan's bed as fever ravaged him. She pressed cool cloths to his forehead, murmured reassurances she wasn't sure he could hear, held his hand when tremors shook his powerful frame. His skin burned like forge-heated metal. Sweat soaked through the linens. This was exactly how it had felt for her. The fire in her veins, the world tilting and spinning, reality fracturing into fragments that made no sense. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Please, just stay with me." As midnight approached, Rovan's eyes opened, fever bright but conscious. "Alara?" Her name came rough, barely recognizable. "I'm here." She squeezed his hand. "I'm right here." "The wine. Someone poisoned." "I know. But you're going to be fine. The worst is passing." He tried to sit up, but she pressed him back with gentle firmness. "Don't. You need to rest." "Can't. There are things." His words tangled together, coherence slipping like sand through fingers. "That night. The convocation. I've been searching." Alara's heart clenched. Even now, poisoned and vulnerable, he was thinking of the mysterious woman he'd lost. The woman he'd been searching for, while Alara had fallen foolishly, impossibly in love with him. "Rest now," she said softly. "You can search tomorrow." but Rovan's hand caught hers with surprising strength. His fever-bright eyes suddenly focused with terrible intensity. "Your scent," he breathed. "Jasmine. And something else. I couldn't place it before, but now." He pulled her closer, his other hand rising to her face with trembling fingers. Elara froze, her heart hammering. "Your voice in the darkness," he continued, each word seeming to cost him. "Telling me something was wrong with the wine, the way you felt when I caught you. Rovan, you're not making sense. The fever, the woman from the convocation." His eyes held hers, and Elara watched understanding dawn like terrible, beautiful sunrise. "The one I've been searching for. The one I couldn't remember clearly because the poison stole my memories. Stop." Elara tried to pull away, but he held firm. "It was you." The words came out broken, awed, devastated. "All this time, it was you." The world stopped spinning. Elara stared at him, at the recognition blazing in his eyes, at the truth that had been hidden beneath months of fragmented memory and moon-herb fog. "No," she whispered, even as her own memories realigned, strong hands steadying her, a voice in the darkness, the scent of pine and smoke, the feeling of safety before shame destroyed everything. "That's not possible. Your touch, your presence." His hand pressed against her cheek, thumb brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "How did I not see it? How did I not know?" Because they had both been poisoned. Both robbed of clarity by someone who had wanted exactly this. Confusion, separation, disgrace. Elara's mind raced. If Rovan was the father, truly not pretend, then everything changed. The arrangement, the temporary engagement, the careful distance they'd maintained, all of it built on a lie that had accidentally been the truth all along. Elara. He pulled her closer, until she was half collapsed against his chest, feeling his heart thunder beneath her palm. "I'm sorry. I'm so damn sorry I didn't find you sooner, that I let you suffer alone. You didn't know. I should have known." His arms wrapped around her, careful of her belly, holding her with desperate gentleness. "I felt it. Even that first night at the feast. Something about you called to me, and I was too blind to understand why." Elara buried her face against his shoulder, months of grief and loneliness finally breaking through the walls she'd built. He was real. This was real. The child growing inside her was truly his, and he knew, and he... Rovan's breathing suddenly deepened, his grip loosening as the fever dragged him back under. "No, no, stay awake." Elara pulled back, seeing his eyes drift closed. "Rovan, please." "Tomorrow," he murmured, already slipping away. "Tell you everything. Tomorrow." His body went slack, falling into the deep sleep that followed moonherb fever. Elara remained beside him, her hand over his heart, feeling it beat strong and steady beneath her palm. He knew. Finally, impossibly, he knew. She wanted to stay, to be there when he woke, to hear the words he'd promised for tomorrow. But exhaustion pulled at her. The baby kicked insistently, and the healers had said she needed rest too. "I'll be back at dawn," she whispered, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "We'll figure this out together." She slipped from his chambers as the first hint of light touched the horizon, her heart lighter than it had been in months. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, they would finally stop pretending. She never made it back to her chambers. The corridor was empty. Too empty. Her guards were gone. And before Elara could scream, before she could run, Rough hands seized her from behind, a cloth pressed over her mouth, chemical sweet and suffocating. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the satisfied smile of her half-sister Moira, watching from the shadows. Then, nothing. Rovan woke to empty chambers and the knowledge that something was catastrophically wrong. He rose despite the healer's protests, despite the lingering weakness in his limbs, despite every rational voice telling him to rest. The revelation from the night before burned through him with more intensity than any fever. Elara was the woman he'd been searching for, the mother of his child, the one who had haunted his fragmented memories for months, and she was gone. "Find her," he commanded, his voice still rough, but carrying absolute authority. "Search every corridor, every chamber, now." The guards scattered like leaves before wind, but Rovan already knew they wouldn't find her within the castle walls. Some instinct, primal and undeniable, told him she'd been taken far beyond his immediate reach. The council convened within the hour, their faces grave. "Your Majesty, we've received communication," Lord Theron said, his expression carefully neutral. "Lady Elara has been removed by parties concerned about the legitimacy of your heir." Removed. The word came out deadly soft. "You mean abducted?" "The council believes this presents an opportunity. To do what, exactly?" Rovan's voice could have frozen blood. "To abandon the mother of my child to political enemies?" "Your Majesty, we don't know if the child is truly—" Rovan's fist slammed against the table with enough force to crack the wood. "I know. That's all that matters. The council cannot sanction a rescue mission based on— Then the council can go to hell." Rovan was already moving toward the door. "I'm not asking for permission. Your Majesty, you cannot simply— Watch me." He left the council chamber in chaos, their protests following him like impotent fury. Let them argue. Let them scheme. He had spent too long playing their political games while the woman carrying his child suffered alone. Not anymore. Rovan mounted his horse without armor, without ceremony, without the trappings of kingship that would only slow him down. He'd extracted the location from a terrified servant who'd witnessed the abduction, an abandoned chapel at the forest's edge, far enough from the castle to hide screams. The ride was brutal, his body still weak from poison, but rage and fear proved stronger than any lingering fever. He found them at dusk. The chapel stood skeletal against darkening sky, its roof half collapsed and walls choked with ivy. 4 guards stood watch outside, hired mercenaries judging by their mismatched armor. They never saw him coming. Rovan moved with the lethal efficiency of a man who had earned his throne through blood and steel. The first guard dropped before he could draw his sword. The second managed to shout before Rovan's blade silenced him. The remaining 2 tried to run. They didn't make it far. Inside the chapel, Moira stood over Elara, a smile of satisfaction on her face that died when Rovan kicked the door open. "Your Majesty," Moira's voice trembled despite her attempt at confidence. "How unexpected." "Get away from her." The command left no room for negotiation. Moira stumbled backward as Rovan crossed to where Elara sat bound to a pillar, her face pale but her eyes fierce with unbroken defiance. "Rovan," she breathed. He cut through her bonds with swift precision, catching her when she swayed. "I've got you. You're safe now." "The baby is fine. You're both fine." His hands moved over her gently, checking for injuries, for harm, for any sign that they'd hurt her. Behind them, Moira made a desperate dash for the door. She didn't reach it. Rovan's voice stopped her cold. "The council will decide your fate. But know this. You just declared war on the wrong family." Guards poured through the entrance, his personal guard who'd followed despite orders. They seized Moira, her protests echoing through the ruined chapel as they dragged her away. Then Rovan and Elara were alone in the fading light. "You came," she whispered as though still unable to believe it. "Did you think I wouldn't?" His hands cupped her face, thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Elara, I remember everything now. That night. What we shared. What they stole from us. I wanted to tell you, I know, and I was a fool not to see it." His forehead pressed against hers, breathing her in like oxygen after drowning. "I've been searching for you while you were right beside me, while you were falling in love with me." Elara's breath caught. "How did you?" "Because I was falling too." The confession came raw, honest. "This stopped being pretend for me weeks ago. Maybe it never was. But you said." "I was lying to myself, trying to maintain distance because I thought you deserved someone who chose you first, not someone who was too poisoned to remember the most important night of his life." Elara's laugh came out half-sob. "I thought I was just a placeholder, a temporary solution until you found her. You are her. You've always been her." His hands moved to her belly, feeling their child move beneath his palms. "And this is real. No more pretending, no more lies." "I love you," Elara whispered, the words finally free. "I tried not to. I thought it would destroy me. But I do." "Then we're both fools." Rovan kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips with desperate tenderness. "Because I'm completely, irrevocably in love with you." For a moment they simply held each other in the ruined chapel while shadows lengthened around them. Then Rovan pulled back, his expression hardening with resolve. "The council tried to have you killed to protect their political interests. They chose wrong. What are you going to do? End this." He helped her to her feet, keeping her close. "No more temporary arrangements. No more strategic engagements. Rovan, I'm going to stand before the throne and tell them the truth." His dark eyes burned with certainty. "That you're my true mate. That the child is mine by fate, by choice, by every definition that matters. And anyone who challenges that will answer to me." Elara's heart swelled with something too large for her chest to contain. "You're really going to burn down your carefully constructed political alliances for me? I'm going to burn down the world if that's what it takes to keep you safe." He lifted her into his arms despite her protests, carrying her toward his waiting horse with the gentleness of a man holding his entire world. Tomorrow they would face the council. Tomorrow the truth would reshape everything. But tonight, in the darkness between the forest and the castle, Elara finally understood what it meant to be chosen. Not as a solution or a strategy, but as the answer to a question neither of them had known they were asking. And for the first time since the moon convocation had destroyed her life, she believed in destiny again. The throne room had never felt so small. Every noble house in the kingdom had been summoned. Council members lined the walls like carrion birds waiting for weakness. Whispers echoed through the vast chamber, speculation about the Alpha King's sudden convocation, about Lady Elara's abduction and miraculous return, about what truth would finally emerge from months of rumors. Elara stood beside the throne, Rovan's hand firm at the small of her back. She wore a gown of deep crimson, queen's colors, though no crown yet graced her head. Her belly was unmistakable now, rounded and full with the child who would change everything. She was terrified, and she had never felt more certain of where she belonged. Rovan stepped forward, and the whispers died like candles snuffed by wind. "I have called you here to end a deception," he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "One that I perpetuated. One that served political necessity but dishonored the woman standing beside me." Elara's breath caught. The council members exchanged glances, confused, calculating. "Months ago, I stood in this very hall and claimed Lady Elara's child as mine." Rovan's gaze swept the room, daring anyone to interrupt. "I said it was my heir, my blood, my responsibility." Lord Theron shifted uncomfortably. "Your Majesty, we are aware of your arrangement." "It was not an arrangement," Rovan's voice cut like steel. "It was a lie. One I told to protect her from your judgment, your whispers, your cruelty." The room erupted in murmurs. Elara felt the weight of hundreds of eyes, felt the old shame trying to claw its way back into her chest. Then Rovan's hand found hers, steady and warm, and the shame dissolved like mist before sunrise. "But there was a deeper truth buried beneath that lie," he continued. "One I could not see until moon herb poison stripped away the fog that had hidden it from us both." He turned to face Elara fully, and in his eyes she saw everything. The night they'd lost, the months they'd survived, the future they would build together. "The child Elara carries is mine," Rovan declared, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. "Not by political necessity, not by convenient fiction, but by fate." Gasps rippled through the assembly. Lord Theron stepped forward. "Your Majesty, surely you cannot expect us to believe." "I expect you to listen." Rovan's tone brooked no argument. 8 months ago, during the moon convocation, someone poisoned the ceremonial wine with concentrated lunar herbs. Lady Elara was deliberately drugged by those who sought her disgrace. I was drugged by those who sought to compromise my judgment. His hand tightened on Elara's. What happened between us that night was real. Our connection was real. The child we created was conceived in truth, even if memory was stolen from us both. Moira, bound and guarded at the edge of the room, had gone deathly pale. And those responsible, Rovan continued, his gaze finding her with lethal precision, will face justice for their crimes against the crown and against the woman who will be my queen. "This is madness," someone protested. "You cannot prove—" "I can prove everything." Rovan gestured, and guards brought forward a trembling servant. "Tell them what you told me." The servant's voice shook, but held truth. "Lady Moira ordered the wine drugged. She wanted Lady Elara disgraced. She wanted her removed from House Viral's succession." More testimonies followed. Servants who had witnessed, suppliers who had been paid, guards who had been bribed to look away. The conspiracy unraveled like thread pulled from a tapestry, revealing the ugly truth beneath. Moira's protests were drowned by the weight of evidence. When the testimonies ended, Rovan turned back to the assembly. "So I ask you now, knowing this truth, knowing that my heir was conceived in love even if we did not remember it, knowing that Elara has endured months of shame for a crime committed against her, will you accept her as your queen?" Silence stretched like a blade's edge. Then, unexpectedly, it was Lady Ashford who stepped forward. The same woman who had refused to sit beside Elara at the feast. She knelt, her voice carrying clear. "I will, Your Majesty, and I beg Lady Elara's forgiveness for my blindness." One by one, others followed, some genuine, some political calculation, but it didn't matter. The tide had turned. Lord Theron remained standing, his expression carved from granite. And if the council still objects, then the council will find new members. Rowan's voice held no compromise. I am done pretending. Done sacrificing truth for politics. Done allowing anyone to question the woman I love. He turned to Alara, and the throne room, with all its politics and power, ceased to exist. Alara of House Virel, he said softly, for her alone. Will you be my queen? Not because circumstance demands it, not because political necessity requires it, but because my heart chose you the moment our paths crossed, even if my mind took months to remember. Tears blurred her vision, but Alara's voice came strong and sure. Yes, I will. Rowan kissed her then, in front of the entire court, sealing their fate with a tenderness that made even the cynical nobles look away. When they broke apart, Alara saw her future reflected in his eyes. Battles they would fight together, children they would raise, a kingdom they would rule side by side. No more pretending, she whispered. Never again, he promised. 3 months later, in the same chambers where Alara had once felt like an exile, she held their son while dawn painted the world in shades of gold. Prince Aldrich had his father's dark hair and his mother's fierce spirit. He was perfect, real, the heir who had been pretend before becoming the truth that changed everything. Rowan stood behind her, arms wrapped around them both, his chin resting on her shoulder. Do you remember, Alara said softly, when I sat alone in that hall, certain my life was over? I remember a woman who refused to break even when the world tried to destroy her. He kissed her temple. I remember realizing I was looking at my future and being too blind to see it clearly. The moon herb stole our beginning, but it gave us a second chance to choose each other. Rowan's hand covered hers where it rested on their sleeping son. And I would choose you in every lifetime, Alara. Poisoned or clear-minded, king or commoner. In every version of fate that exists. Alara leaned back into his warmth, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her spine, feeling the weight of the crown that now graced her head, feeling the impossible truth of her life. She had been disgraced, forgotten, sentenced to isolation, and she had become a queen. Not through pretense or political maneuvering, but through the simplest and most profound truth of all. She had been loved when she believed herself unlovable. Chosen when she thought herself disposable, claimed when the world had tried to erase her. What are you thinking? Rowan murmured against her hair. Alara smiled, watching sunrise paint promises across their son's peaceful face. That destiny has a strange sense of humor, she said, and that I'm grateful for every poisoned moment that led me here. Here, Rowan echoed, his arms tightening around his family, where you were always meant to be. Outside, the kingdom awakened to a new day. Inside, the Alpha King and his queen stood together as they would for all the days to come. No longer pretending. No longer alone. Finally, impossibly, completely whole. If you enjoyed this story, let me know in the comments below. Your support helps me bring more moonlit stories like this to life. Don't forget to subscribe for more tales of wolves, romance, and second chances that refuse to stay buried.